Hello again, I'm Maurice Barratt and I've got another teaching in the 6,000 years of Babylon. We're coming to the end now. This is book number 5. I've written 5 books. I've started Genesis and end up in the new heaven and the new earth. Looking at the system of Babylon, the spiritual system, it started in the Garden of Eden. It's really the plan of Satan to gather worship. Babylon is a system of worship. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, got people to worship him with the statue, prophesying what will happen in the last days. So Nimrod, the first type of Antichrist, he built a tower to reach God for worship. Let's reach a tower to reach, let's build a city and a tower to reach to heaven. That's worship. So it's a counterfeit worship, the system. I'm not talking about physical places, the Medes and the Persians, the Roman Empire. I'm talking the spiritual descendants from the Garden of Eden to worship Satan. When Eve took the fruit, she was worshipping Satan because she disobeyed God. There's only 2 people to serve. You can't serve yourself. You have a choice. You can serve God or Satan. So when she rebelled against God and said, I'll please myself, I'll eat the fruit, she was actually worshipping Satan, serving Satan. And that started the counterfeit system of Babylon. So we're coming to an end now. And I've called this study From Babylon to Jerusalem. Because in the last days, in Revelation, it says, come out of her, my people. So God expected his people to be in Babylon in the last days. That was written 2,000 years ago. But he said, come out of her at the time when Jesus comes, because Babylon is judged just before Jesus comes. So we've got to get out of the system. It's all right to be in it because God put his people in Babylon, as we'll see. So let's start the series, the sermon. Well, cities mean something in the Bible. Canaan's the land of promise, isn't it? When we talk about Canaan, it's the land of promise. So spiritually, it's our inheritance. So for us, Canaan isn't this life, it's the millennium. That's our inheritance. People say we cross over Jordan into Canaan's land when we die, but that's not a type of Canaan. It's not this life, it's the life to come. When Joshua, our Jesus, our conqueror, comes and subdues our enemies, that's how they get in Canaan. So when Jesus comes and subdues the nations, that'll be our Canaan, the land of milk and honey. So spiritually, the principles never alter, the Old and New Testament. We're in a different dispensation. But God doesn't change his principles, does he? His models don't change from the Old to New Testament. Because God doesn't change his character, he changes methods and different things. So Egypt is a type of the world. I think most Christians accept that when you go to Bible college. They teach, Pharaoh's a type of Satan, the god of this world, and Egypt is the world. And so we're redeemed out of Egypt. We're not redeemed out of Babylon. When we accept Jesus, we're taken out of the world. Jesus said, you're not of the world like I'm not of the world. So we're redeemed out of Egypt. That was a prophecy. By the blood of the Lamb, they got out, didn't they? The Passover, they killed the Lamb and they were out of Egypt. So Jesus was the Passover Lamb and his blood allowed us to get out of Egypt. So it's a perfect time. So Egypt's the world and we're redeemed out of the world. What's Babylon? Babylon can't be the world because Egypt's the world. So a different country, a different king can't be the same symbol. Well, Babylon, I believe, is where God puts his own people when they want to go back to Egypt. God said to Israel, never go back to Egypt, because that's in type to undo your salvation. If you go back to Egypt, that's where you're redeemed from. You've unredeemed yourself, and you've gone back to where you're redeemed from. You're back in the pawnbroker's shop. You were redeemed. So God says you never go back to Egypt. So when you backslide, God doesn't put you in Egypt, because that would be to write off your salvation. So when a church or an individual or a nation turn from God, he puts them in Babylon and says, you want the world? Well, you're still my people. Israel was still God's people in Babylon, but they served Babylon. They worshipped the wrong God. They had the mixture. They still worshipped Jehovah, the Jews in Babylon, but they weren't in the promised land. They were worshipping the real God, but also in Babylon. That was the mixture. And God puts his people in Babylon, and it's a form of punishment, but it's not forever. He said to Israel, you go for 70 years. So it's a predetermined period. And 70's like 7 symbolic, isn't it, of completion. So when your punishment's complete, I'll take you out again. You're my people. I'll take you back to the promised land. And so that's with us. We're the new Israel, aren't we? We're grafted onto Israel. So we've got to come out of Babylon in the last days, because the punishment's finished. This is the time of the Gentiles. So Babylon's a place of mixture. Babylon means confusion, doesn't it? Mixture. Because you're not serving God, you're serving the world as well. So God's put you in Babylon. And God despises Babylon. It's a cup of abomination. You know, the woman, the whore, I'll show you the whore, and she had a cup in her hand full of filthy abominations and confusion. And a woman is symbolic in the Bible. There's only 2 women in the Bible. They're either the bride of Christ or the wife of God in the Old Testament, or the whore of Babylon. There's only 2. So Ruth was a type of the bride of God. Mary, the mother of Jesus, was a type of the bride. Jezebel was a type of the whore. So every bad woman is a type of the whore, and every good woman is a symbol of the virgin bride of Christ. There's only 2 women. So Jerusalem, the city, is also a woman. Jerusalem is the bride of Christ, also the new Jerusalem coming down from heaven as a bride adorned for a husband. But Babylon is also a woman, the whore of Babylon. He said, I saw a woman sat on a horse. Come and I'll show you the whore of Babylon. So Babylon, the city, is also the whore. And Jerusalem, New Jerusalem, is the bride of Christ. Cities and women are the same. So God's people end up in Babylon when they backslide. Sadly, that's much of the modern church. They're in Babylon. And God's put them there. I was born in Babylon. I was born in the system. I was born into religion, Christianity. Everyone's born into some religion, because atheism is a religion, so you're born into some culture, some religion. I was born into a Pentecostalism. I was born into the religion of the Assemblies of God. The denomination is carnal, that's not God. The people are God's people. I was saved, I was serving God, but I was in Babylon. And many of you have come out of different cults and religions, but you were serving God. You weren't serving the devil, you wanted God, but you were trapped in religion. That's all right. You were born into it. That's where you found God, in religion. And that's okay, because that's the time we're in. People were born in Babylon, and it wasn't their fault. God didn't put them in Babylon, He put the parents in the Babylon. But when you did produce children, they're born in Babylon. So they didn't know anything different. They didn't know the promised land. They didn't know the grapes the size of footballs and the honey. They only knew Babylon. That was home to them. And God said, don't rebel against Babylon. Build houses, plant vineyards, have children. It's your punishment. It's all right. You don't want the real God. I'll give you the counterfeit. Stick it out. Build houses and plant trees and have families. It's okay. So it's all right. I don't decry people for being in Babylon. I want to get them out, because you're born into some religion. Well, when we have a revival, it's like the whore producing a baby. If a prostitute's have a baby, the baby's not a prostitute, is it? The baby's a virgin, pure. It doesn't matter what the mother is, the baby's born a virgin. So when people in Babylon, there's a revival, what happens? They're pushed out. I was born at the beginning of, it was happened a few years the Pentecostal revival. So people spoke in tongues and it was fresh and new and they were on fire for God. What did religion do? It pushed them out. They said, we don't want speaking in tongues in a Baptist church, so they threw them out. We don't want you speaking in tongues in the Anglican church. They threw them out. The prostitute, when it's having a baby, has to push the baby out. You know, you're a midwife, so you know the baby doesn't come out itself. You have to push it out. You have to help it. I was witness 5 of my children being born, and the midwife says, push. Come again, push. You know, embrace the pain. It's good. Push. You know, and you're frightened to push, but you have to push. And the religion can't stand the virgin bride. So when people get on fire and get the real God, the religion pushes them out. It's a baby and it's virgin. So every revival, you know, when Martin Luther said, it's wrong indulgences, that's wrong, and he challenged it, the Catholic Church pushed him out. Martin Luther didn't want to not be a Catholic. He wanted to reform the Catholic Church. He said that's wrong. Indulgences, praying to Mary, praying to the saints. Jesus is the only advocate. So he wanted to reform the Catholic Church, but they pushed him out. John Wesley was in the Anglican Church. He didn't want to become a Methodist. He was an Anglican minister, but they forced him out. You see, the whore always has children and forces them out. That's the new revival, and it's pure. The sad thing is that after 50 years, they prostitute themselves. They copy the mother. They're a virgin, but when they grow up, they have a choice. Do I stay pure or do I copy my mother? And every revival that I've known to date, in 2,000 years of the church, have gone back and become a daughter of Babylon. They brought entertainment in, you see. They brought business practices into the church. They brought politics into the church. Jobs for the boys at the top, clergy and laity. We're the hierarchy and you've got to do what we say. You get heavy shepherding, you get all sort of... That's politics, isn't it? It's not Christianity. So they prostitute themselves. They bring the world system into the church, and it's prostitution. Well, many people see the system for what it is and come out, but many don't know that they're in it. And when you tell them plainly you're in Babylon, you're religious, they can't see it. They're blind and you can't get out. If you think you can see, there's no hope for you. Well, if you're blind and think you can see, you'll never go to the doctors for a cure, will you? If you've got cancer and think you've not got cancer, you'll die because you don't go for help because you think you're all right. So many people, they're blind, and when you tell them you're in Babylon, they can't see it. So you need a revelation. That's the first point. You need a revelation. You can't get out of Babylon by yourself. You need the revelation. And often it's disaster, or often you stand up for what you think is right and you get pushed out. And then you see it clearer. So we need to expose the false. I came out of Babylon. I came out of religion, and I was very critical of it. Because you are when you come out. I was anti-church, anti-everything, because I'd come out of the false. And I've had to learn, that's where I was born, that's your mother. You was born in the religion, that's your mother. So Richard Wurmbrand said, if your mother's a whore, you don't hate her. You hate what she does, but you don't hate your mother. She's your mother. You must respect her, but you hate what she does. So I don't hate the church. I hate how the system runs, but they're God's people in the church, so they need help, don't they? So we mustn't become bigoted. It's like when you find out about the one world system. We expose it, but we're not meant to fight it and lobby the government and get bigoted, and that's the devil diverting our attention, where all we can think of is fighting the system. Let the system go on. We expose it and we know about it, but we're not fighting it, are we? In that sense, we're trying to change it. Of course, I've got to stand up for what's right against the system, but I'm not trying to change it because Satan's the god of this world. It's his system. So until Jesus comes, there'll always be that system in greater or lesser degrees. So I don't want anyone to become bitter. I'm not anti-church. I am the church, so how can I be anti? I came from Babylon, so they're my brothers and sisters who need enlightening. So we've got to be careful that when you come out, you don't criticise where you came from. But except for God's grace, you'd still be in the system. I'd be still in there. I was happy there till I realised. And many people are happy in there. It's up to us. Like you said, pluck the brands from the burning. Well, that's the negative side to lobby and try and change the system. We don't try and change the system of Babylon, and we don't try and change the system of the world. I will never sign a petition against abortion, against homosexuality. That's not my job, to change the system. My job is to change people. And when I witness to a witch and they accept Christ, that'll change the people, change the environment. You don't change the environment to change people. If you get a clean person, you put them in a pigsty, they've cleaned it up in a fortnight. If you put a dirty person in a beautiful house, it'll become a pigsty, because people change the environment. What the government do, well, if we have better housing and better benefits, it'll change people. It won't. Dirty people are dirty people. Clean people are clean people. You change people. If a man gets saved and is a drunkard, I change the whole family. And he changes his environment. If he's a boss, he changes his work practices. He gets out of corruption. So my time and the time as Christians, we change people, not systems. When we try and change systems, we do-gooders, aren't we? Feeding the poor is a consequence of being a Christian. That's not our job. Jesus said, the poor you'll always have with you. You'll never solve the problem, because the problem is not poverty, it's greed. The greed of the rich is why people are poor. So you can't solve that. It'd be better to attack the greed of the rich than solve the problem of the poor. It's unsolvable. Well, Satan's the god of this world. We feed the poor because we have compassion. But that's not our main aim. The main aim is to change people. So, God takes you out of the world, but he doesn't want you to stay in the wilderness. He wants to get you into Canaan. So you've got to go through the wilderness. We've looked at that. It's the same when you come out of Babylon. God doesn't get you out of Babylon to come out and say, well, I'm out of the system now. He takes you out to put you in. So when he took Israel out of Babylon, it wasn't to stay along the Euphrates, fishing up the river. It was to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. So that's the journey from Babylon to Jerusalem. The only reason you get out is to go and rebuild the bride. With a job to do. When they left Israel, it wasn't to migrate to another country. It was to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. They had a work to do. So if God's calling you out of the system, there's a job for you to do. You've got to prepare Jerusalem, which is the bride of Christ. That's my job. I've come out of the system. So I don't look back into the system and criticise it. I turn my back on that. I've left that. So I'm going to Jerusalem, and I've got all the facilities, because Israel had the gold, the silver, and all the facilities to rebuild the temple. I've got to build the bride of Christ. That's my job as a teacher. Get people out of Babylon. Stop them being bitter. Don't look back. There's nothing behind you. Don't criticise them. You've left it. Rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. That's the journey that we're on. And it's important to know the process, because if you don't know the process, if you don't know you've left Babylon to build Jerusalem, you'll never get there. You'll wander around up and down the Euphrates, won't you? And there's robbers there on the way and dangerous ground. So the problem is, when you're redeemed from Egypt, it's not really your choice. Because unless God opens your eyes, unless the blindfold comes off, you'll never accept Jesus. You'll never get out of the world. Salvation is God's prerogative. You have a choice when God chooses you. Jesus said to the disciples, you've not chosen me, I chose you. You said yes when I said follow me, be a disciple. And they said yes, Lord, and followed it. But they had a choice, but they didn't have a choice to follow Jesus. He picked them. In fact, God picked them for Jesus. He said, thine they were, and you gave them to me, and I've lost none of them. So God opens the eyes of people. You have a choice to accept or reject the offer, but everyone's not offered. Talk to the man next door, he can't see it. You need saving. What do you mean? I'm a good person, I'm not bad. Yeah, but you'll go to the lake of fire. Oh, I don't believe in it. I'm watching Connell Street anyway, good night. He's not interested, he's as blind as a bat. You can't, you frighten him with hell, he's not interested. Say, yeah, but you can live forever. He doesn't believe you. If he believed you that you could live forever, he'd say, how much? They'd mortgage the house if they could never die and live forever, wouldn't they? To know that they could live forever in paradise, you'd mortgage your house, you'd sell your car. It's not that they don't want it to live forever. They don't believe you can offer it them. They just don't believe it because they're blind. And until God opens their eyes, they have no choice to accept or reject. They're not rejecting you. God's not opened their eyes. Only when God opens their eyes can they say. My wife couldn't say yes to me until I asked her. She couldn't say, yes, I'll marry you before I asked her, could she? I make the first move. I say, will you marry me? And then she's got a choice and say, no, you're not tall enough. I'm marrying the milkman, he's 6 foot. I always wanted a tall, dark, handsome man. I don't want a little bald man like you. She has a choice, but she chose a little bald man like me, thank God. I'm happy. But she only had the choice when I suggested free will is a consequence of predestination. I chose her first. So God chooses us first, but gives us the opportunity to say yes or no. And we said yes to Jesus or we wouldn't be here. But it's different with Babylon. The first move doesn't come with God. The first move comes with us. And it's got those with a willing heart. Don't forget, a whole nation came out of Israel, but only 2 got in the promised land. That's unbelievable. I'm putting the lowest figure. People say 2.5 to 4 million people. Depends how you compute it. Let's take the lowest. 2.5 million people came out of Egypt. Only 2 of those 2.5 million went in the promised land. God's plan didn't fail. They failed, but God's plan didn't. Their children went in, but they didn't. Only 2, Joshua and Caleb. Don't you think that's unbelievable? When God destroyed the whole world, only 8 got saved. Out of the millions that were on the earth in the flood. It's always a remnant that go through. That's all right. God's looking for a remnant. So all of the people who were in Babylon didn't go back. I think it was so many thousand Jews went into Babylon. I forget now. I think it was like 100,000 that were taken into Babylon. But don't forget, 70 years they had children. No contraception, so they didn't have 2 children. They often had many children. So in 70 years, 2 generations, how many do you think they were? There was millions of them probably in Babylon. Don't forget the Jews were in every province. Babylon was from India to Ethiopia. 127 countries that Babylon owned in the time of Esther. And the Jews in every province had to be killed. So they were scattered through the kingdom. They were part of Babylon now. They'd grown. God's people are always fruitful. But only if it actually numbers how many went back. And the decree set came, everyone who has a willing heart. Let me read Jeremiah 11:4. This is God speaking, which I commanded your fathers in the day that I brought them forth out of the land of Egypt, from the iron furnace, saying, obey my voice and do them according to all which I command you. So you shall be my people and I will be your God. God says, I took you out of Egypt. I brought you forth. I will come down and deliver them. It was God's deliverance. Exodus 3:7 and 8. And the Lord said, surely I've seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and I've heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. God heard the cry, and I am come down to deliver them. God delivered Israel, they didn't deliver themselves. This is the comparison I want to make with Egypt and Babylon. And I will come down and take them to a land, a large land flowing with milk and honey, and to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hittites and the Jebusites. I've studied that every single one of those, there were giants in the land, contaminated seed with the angels mating with women. Every one of those had giants. You can trace it back. I've done a study on it and shown that every of those, they had to destroy the land of that bad DNA that had come through the flood, because Noah was perfect. But it didn't say his wife was and his sons were, so the giants carried on after the flood, and they had to destroy them. Amalek was the seed of the giants. Amalek came from the giants, and God had to destroy that seed that had mingled with the angels. I can't go into that, it's another full study. So God wanted them to get into Egypt, Israel, to build the wall. But it was a selective exodus. Let me read from Ezra. I must get through this study. I've got 3 pages and I don't want it to be a long study. Now, in the first year of Cyrus, now God called Cyrus, he was a despot. He never turned to God. He worshipped demons all his life. But God said, he's mine anointed. I've chosen him for my purpose. Now, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled. The Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and put it also in writing. Thus said Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord God of heaven hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth. That was the promise to Babylon. Wherever men dwell, that's yours. And that's the statue. The Medes and the Persians had the same promise. So do the Romans. That's why the Roman Catholic Church wanted to Christianize the world, because that was the heritage that Babylon, God had promised them that. And the Jesuits run the whole world now, if you understand how the one world system runs. And he's charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is there among you of his people? His God be with him, and let him go to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, to build the house of the Lord God of Israel. He is the God which is in Jerusalem. God told him, God dwells in Jerusalem, he doesn't dwell in Babylon. So he commissioned Cyrus to send his people back. It tells you the actual number. Cyrus said, everyone who has a willing heart. There was a great cost to leaving Babylon, you know, because family and friends were there. They'd made friends when they were in Babylon. Some of the children were born in Babylon. Canaan was a foreign country. Babylon was their home. They had jobs, they had businesses, they had vineyards. And it wasn't only emigrate, sell up here and move to Jerusalem. There was work to do. They had hard manual labour when they got back. They didn't leave to emigrate. They left to build the walls of Jerusalem. That was hard work. Carrying the stone and mixing the mortar and repairing the temple. That's what they went back to work for. So it was a challenge. So some of them said, well, I've got family here in Babylon. You know, I've married a Babylonian lady and I've got my business here, even if they didn't mix with Babylon. So it was only a selective few, whoever has a willing heart. So the call to come out of Babylon is those who have got a willing heart. If you want to stay in Babylon, you're still God's people. You don't lose your salvation because you're in religion. You're not the bride of Christ because you won't build Jerusalem. But God doesn't disown you when you stay in Babylon. But he wants you to get out. But he knows that only a few will get out. And the whole congregation that came together were 42,360, 60, besides their servants and their maids, of whom there were 7,337. And they were among the 200 singing men and singing women. So it actually details specifically who came out. There were so many, and the servants were so many, and the singers were so many. It was a specific number that came out. The remnant, most of them stayed in Babylon. Another point I want to make of is timing. You can't get out of Babylon when you want. God said to Israel, you're here for 70 years. Let me read it, Jeremiah 29:10. Thus saith the Lord God, that after 70 years be accomplished. So They're in jail. You know, if you're punished, you have to serve your sentence, don't you? When 70 years are accomplished at Babylon, I will visit you and perform my good word towards you in causing you to return to this place. After 70 years, I'll take you back. But it's those who have a willing heart. If you want to stay in Babylon, if you're comfortable in religion, well, you've got God. You're serving the real God, but you're trapped in religion. But if you want to get out, I'll be gracious to you and free you. But it's to get out, to go in. You've got to prepare the bride. You've got to build Jerusalem. Otherwise, you're in the wilderness again. And Daniel understood that. Daniel's intercession is what got them out of Babylon. I can't go into it, but Daniel 9, verse 2 and 3. I've written 3 books on intercession, and I explain about it, Daniel's intercession. And Daniel says in the first year of his reign, I think this is Darius, so it's after, or I don't know, I'm not sure, I think it's Darius. I, Daniel, understood by books the number of the years whereof the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years. And I set my face unto the Lord to seek by prayer, supplication, fasting, sackcloth and ashes. So he started to pray that God would get them out, because he could say, God, read his prayer, it's only right you put us in Babylon with disobedience, and I was in Babylon along with them. You're right to put us in Babylon because we didn't want your laws. So it's just, you were just, and you have a right to put us in Babylon. But now the 70 years are up. Will you hear our prayer, and will you return us to our promised land? And Daniel prayed and fasted. But Daniel must have read Jeremiah. He was there 70 years, so it must be about 90 now, because he went as a young man, maybe 17, and he's 70 years in Babylon, and he must have read the Jeremiah how many times in 70 years? But he never had the revelation. You see, you need a revelation. Daniel suddenly said, I understood. Wow, I've been 70 years in Babylon. And he remembers what he read in Jeremiah. Wow, it's time to get out. And he prayed, and God fulfilled his promise. And an intercession got God's people out of Babylon. And I believe that's why Ezra and Nehemiah got the people out of Babylon, because of Daniel's prayer. It's all about the same time. Well, it's time again now. The church has been in Babylon since Jesus' birth, just after Jesus died. You know, Ananias and Sapphira, they were covetous. That's part of Babylon. Babylon were the instigators and the inventors of promissory notes and money and title deeds to houses. Everything all to do with covetousness and money comes from Babylon. Like our philosophy comes from Greek, doesn't it? Plato and Aristotle. That's where we get our mindset from. But the covetousness and the money of the West comes from the system of Babylon. It's a system of covetousness, as well as many other things. Because a prostitute is covetousness. She sells herself for money. She doesn't sell herself because she loves sex and loves men. She does it for money. A woman who's promiscuous goes with men because she loves men. But a prostitute does it for money. She's covetous. She doesn't do it for pleasure. She does it for money. I've talked to prostitutes and they despise men. They're nice to them because they want the money, but they despise them. They know they're dirty old men. And they despise them. They're covetous, you see. That's the system of Babylon. Babylon is the prostitute, the whore of Babylon. It's prostituting yourself for money. So the system of Babylon, that's why the Catholic Church is the richest corporation in the world. Never mind the richest religion. There's no corporation, Walmart, IBM and those, pale into significance with the Catholic Church. What they own is unbelievable. There are treasures in the Vatican would clear off all the world's debt. They're rich, but nobody knows what billions and trillions they have, because it's a system of covetousness. I'm not criticising the Catholic Church, because the Church of England are the third biggest landowners in the country, I believe. And they have property. So when you get to the top of any religion, it's covetousness, it's money and hierarchy and living in pleasure, while the rest of the plebs just, give the tithes and give the things. But the people at the top, They don't give the tithes to anyone. They collect the tithes and live off them. Can you see how religion works? It's a system of covetousness. But we're supposed to give, not take. The church should be giving, not taking. The faith preacher should be stood at the door. If he boasts, I've got £1 million, he should be stood at the door. Who can't pay the rent this week? Come past me. There's the idea. You pay the rent. Who's in debt? I'll clear that off. They should be giving, but they're saying, and little old widows are giving the tithes to the church so they can live in prosperity. How crazy is that? And how deceived are people who do it? And we've been there, haven't we? So we're criticising ourselves because, you know, I know people who've been in the church and they give to these evangelists and pay the tithes. And because when you're in Babylon, you can't see the wood for the trees, can you? It's only when you come out. So I'm not too critical of those people in there because that's where I was. I was doing that, so. But now's the time to go. I believe there's a Cyrus decree throughout the world for the Christians. Revelation 19, 6 and 7. And I heard a voice, as it were, the voice of a great multitude, as the voice of many waters, and as of mighty thundering, saying, Hallelujah, for the Lord God omnipotent reigns. This is when Babylon, just before Babylon's judge. Let's rejoice and be glad and give honour to him, for the marriage of the Lamb is come, and his wife has made herself ready. That's not the scripture I thought. I thought it was the scripture, come out of Babylon, my people. Oh, sorry. The wife has made herself ready. So God doesn't get the bride ready. The bride gets herself ready. The bride has made herself ready. God won't get you ready. You've got to voluntarily do it. Get out of Babylon and build the walls. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people. So his people are in Babylon, so they're not the devil's people, they're God's people. The devil's people are in the world, he takes them captive at the will, but God's people are in Babylon. Come out of it, that you're not partake of her sins, and you're not receive not of her plagues. Revelation in 18 is the destruction of Babylon. So he said, get out before I judge you, because God is going to judge the counterfeit, and you need to get out now. But what I want to leave you with, you come out to build the walls of Jerusalem, but not physically. Obviously. We're not building the physical Jerusalem. God doesn't want me to go to Israel and offer myself as a labourer or a bricklayer or whatever I can do and rebuild the temple. People are sending money to the Zionists to rebuild the temple, but the Zionists are going to put the Antichrist there. They don't know. We're not building the physical temple, we're building New Jerusalem, which is the bride of Christ. So the walls are broken down of the bride of Christ, aren't they? There's schisms, there's spots in the garments. We've got to build the bride of Christ. That's what we've got to do. And it's imperative we see the future and stop living for the present. We're not living for the present, we're living for the future. You know, faith always sees the future. Did you know that Abram saw New Jerusalem, the bride of Christ? Did you know that Enoch saw the bride of Christ? People of faith see past their life. They see past the next miracle. You know, are you looking for your next miracle? People of faith see past the next miracle. They see past their life. We're not living for this life, are we? Even the occult. You know, the one world system, it's been going on for hundreds of years. And they die in faith. They say, we may not see it, but we're working towards it. It doesn't matter. We're building the new world system, and we'll die and others will take it on. They believe it. They see the future. They see past their life. They knew that it wouldn't happen in their lifetime. It's too big a thing to take over the world, but they believe it will happen. They've got more faith than Christians because we live for this life. Bless me now. And we don't see New Jerusalem. Let me show you that even the Old Testament saw the bride of Christ. Hebrews 11. It said that Abram, the father of faith, looked for a city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. What city is that? New York, Rome, Manchester, Tipperary, San Francisco. What's it? The only city that God builds, God didn't want us to build cities. He didn't say to have them build cities. It was Cain, the bad seed, that built the first city. God meant us to work the land, not live in cities, like battery chickens all hooked together. That's where all the crime is in the cities, where all the skullduggery goes. That's where they build the banks in the cities. God meant us to live off the land and to be fruitful and multiply. So the only city that God will build is the New Jerusalem. So they saw the city, the bride of Christ, coming down New Jerusalem as a city. And Abraham saw that. But you know, all I've not got it in my notes, I'll just turn to it in Hebrews, because I didn't realise, I knew Abraham looked for a city whose builder and maker was God. I didn't realise that all these examples of faith did. Enoch and Noah, these are before the flood. Enoch and Abel before the flood, and Noah, and all it goes through the list. These all died in faith, not having received the promises. What were the promises? The promise was the New Jerusalem, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims in the earth. We'll never see the promises. It's not for our generation. So they died in faith. For they that say such things declare plainly they seek a country. And truly, if they'd been mindful of that country from whence they came out, they might have had opportunity to have returned. But now they desire a better country, that is a heavenly. So they weren't looking to this life, they were looking to a heavenly country. Wherefore God is not ashamed to call their breath, to be called their God. For he hath prepared for them a city. God's prepared a country and a city for these people, for Abram. And they died in faith, never having seen it. Abram died in faith because he was looking for a city whose builder and maker was God. And Abel, that man in the Old Testament, he saw the bride. We see by faith the end of the plan, not now, not my suffering, not my problems at work, not my problems in my marriage, not that I'm not married or I've got a husband who doesn't love me. We forget our problems because we're looking to the future. Not when Jesus comes. They saw past the millennium. They saw the new heaven and the new earth, and the city that God built coming down to the new earth. Abel was the second son of Adam, wasn't he? Cain and Abel. And Abel was one of those faith that saw the heavenly Jerusalem. Adam must have told him, we've sinned and we've been put out of the garden. Surely they told his children, we can't go in the garden. I believe the cherub was there with the flaming sword to stop them getting back into the garden till the flood. Because God put an angel there if he disappeared the garden? It was to stop them getting in, so it was there. But I believe that may be Atlantis, that they talk about the paradise that was lost. I don't know, but certainly it was there in those days, because why would God put an angel there if it disappeared? I believe it was destroyed in the flood. But Adam would have told his son, we can't go there. You see that cherubim? We can't go, we've disobeyed God. So they would have known. But because they followed God, they had the promise. One day God will create a new creation and it'll be perfect. We can get back into the garden. We can get back into the paradise of God. Can you see they had the promise? Those early patriarchs, they saw that we've sinned, but they had the promise of God. God can deal with the sin in the fullness of time. God will send his son and redeem us. And they saw past that. And they saw the new heaven and the new earth wherein dwelleth righteousness. They saw what they'd lost. They couldn't go back into the garden. That's what it said. If they knew where they'd come from, they had a reason to go back. They'd come from the garden, but they couldn't go back. So they looked for a city in the future. And that's what we should be looking. We've come out of Babylon. We've come out of the world into Babylon. You came out of the world and you found yourself a religion. So out of the world into Babylon. But now we've come out of Babylon. We've got to look past, turn our back on the world, turn our back on Babylon. And we've got to see that New Jerusalem, the bride. That's my aim, to be the bride of Christ. Paul said, if by any means I may obtain the resurrection. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Look, forgetting those things which behind, I'm looking forward, and I'm running the race, that by any means I may obtain the resurrection. So have I finished? Ezra, let me read Ezra. It's a long way from Babylon to Jerusalem. It's not the next day. You don't come out of Babylon and the next day I'm the bride of Christ. It's a 500-mile journey as the crow flies. About 900 mile, they reckon, because you've got to go along the river Euphrates and then down to Israel. So that's take a few months. You know, you go at the speed of the slowest. There was an entourage. There was 34,000 women and children, pregnant women and children, and all the gold and silver. They were on ox carts. You can read it. They had ox carts to carry on. There was tons of gold and tons of silver. There was millions of pounds worth of value to rebuild all that Nebuchadnezzar had robbed from Solomon's temple. Millions of pounds worth of gold and silver and brass and some of the things were solid gold. The mercy seat was solid gold, wasn't it? You know, that weighs a lot. An ox travels at 3 miles an hour on average. It's not very fast. So it would take them months to go 900 miles. So it wasn't a quick journey. It was a long journey. There were robbers on the way. Ezra had to fast and pray and say, God, will you protect us? I've opened my mouth and said, King, if you let us go back, God will protect us. So he said, I've opened my big mouth. I can't ask for an armed guard now. I've said God will protect us. So he said, we better fast and pray that God will protect us. And he did. And they were easy prey for the robbers and the highwaymen because they had little children and babies and pregnant women and ox carts that are 3 miles an hour full of gold. And God protected them. They got there. So we have a very precious treasure. We have the facilities to build Jerusalem. That's exciting. If you come out of Babylon, you've got the materials, not physical, gold and silver. You've got the wherewithal to rebuild the bride. You've got the materials. You can educate people and make them the bride of Christ instead of the whore. We've got, if it's a type, it must follow, mustn't it? If they had all the means to rebuild Jerusalem. Ezra 8, verse 21 and 33. I'll come to a close. So Ezra, he said, I've opened my mouth. Then I proclaimed a fast there at the river Ahava, that we might afflict ourselves before God, to seek a right way for us and for our little ones and for all our substance. Why? Why did they seek God? For I was ashamed to require of the king a band of soldiers and horsemen to help us against the enemy in the way, because I've opened my big mouth, because we'd spoken unto the king, saying, the hand of our God is upon all them that do good to seek him, but his power and wrath is against all those that forsake him. So we fasted and besought our God for this, and he was entreated of us. We had a safe journey. Intercession is so important to prepare the bride. I can't go into that. So the alternative to protecting yourself and the world protecting you is to fast and pray. Say, God, I don't want the world to protect me. I'm going to fast this week that you will. I'm going into a situation at work. I'm going to a situation in my ministry. I'm going to fast this week that you can look after me, God, because I don't want to look after myself. I don't want to get the union in to defend me. I don't want the world to defend me. I want you to defend me. That takes faith. But that's what we've got to do, and fasting and praying will do it. So Christians who rely on the world for protection aren't on the road to Jerusalem, are they? They're still in Babylon. Only people of faith, like the Hebrews who had their eyes open, can leave Babylon for Jerusalem. It's tough. You're risking your life, aren't you? Robbers on the way. Hard work when you get there. But that's what Jesus promised. It's a restricted gate. It says it's a straight gate. Spelled S-T-R-A-I-T, not straight to mean no bends in it. There's plenty of bends in the Christian life. Plenty of twisty roads. But straight, in other words, dire straits. I'm in dire straits. I'm restricted. I'm compressed. So it's hard to get in. It said, strive, fight to get into that gate, because it's a narrow way and few find it. The broad way is easy. The broad way isn't the world, it's religion. You're saved, you're God's people, but you're on the broad way, and it leads to utter ruin, not the lake of fire. We're on the narrow way, but it leads to life. You'll be the bride of Christ. So let me encourage you. I don't know where you're at. Maybe you're still in the world and you're not even a Christian and have just watched this video. Accept Jesus. If you believe in Jesus, accept him, give him your life, get out of Babylon. And if you're in religion and you realise you're trapped in religion, ask God to get you out. Because God wants to get people out of Babylon. So pray and ask God to get you out. And when you're out, don't stay out. Go into Jerusalem, start to prepare the bride, start to prepare yourself first. It's a long journey. Prepare yourself and then prepare other people. So I'm hoping I've said something that means something to you. Email me. We've got a website with an email address. You can ask questions, you can criticise, you can say whatever you want. It's all right. Have a wonderful week. God bless you. There's one more study in the series. I hope you tune into it.